Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to be reading the story of the 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time, there lived in the village of Montigny-Serac a little cowboy with either father or mother. Without either father or mother. Okay. His name was Michael, but he was always called the Stargazer, because when he drove his cows over the commons to seek for pasture, he went along with his head in the air, gaping at nothing. As he had pale skin, blue eyes, and hair that curled all over his head, the village girls used to call after him, "Well, Stargazer, what are you doing?" And Michael would answer, "Oh, nothing," and go on his way without even turning to look at them. The fact that he thought them very ugly, with their sunburnt necks, their great red hands, their coarse petticoats, and their wooden shoes. He had heard that somewhere in the world there were girls whose necks were slender, whose hands were small, and were always dressed in the finest silks and laces, and were called princesses. And while his companions round the fire saw nothing in the flames but common everyday fancies, he dreamed that he had the happiness to marry a princess. One morning about the middle of August, just at midday, when the sun was hottest, Michael ate his dinner of a dry piece of bread and went to sleep under an oak. While he slept, he dreamt that there appeared before him a beautiful lady dressed in a robe of cloth of gold, who said to him, "Go to the castle of Beloeil, and there you shall marry a princess." That evening, the little cowboy, this meant something different in medieval Europe, basically that he was a cowherder. We'll call him the cowherd. The little cowherd, who had been thinking a great deal about the advice of the lady and in the golden dress, told his dream to the farm people. But as was natural, they only laughed at the stargazer. The next day, at the same hour, he went to sleep again under the same tree. The lady appeared to him a second time and said, "Go to the castle of Beloeil, and you shall marry a princess." In the evening, Michael told his friends that he had dreamt, and the same dream again. But they only laughed at him more than before. "Never mind," he thought to himself. "If the lady appears to me a third time, I will do as she tells me." The following day, to the great astonishment of all the village, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a voice was heard singing, "Releo, releo, how the cattle go." It was the little cowherd driving his herd back to the byre. The farmer began to scold him furiously, but he answered quietly, "I am going away," made his clothes into a bundle, said goodbye to all his friends, and boldly set out to seek his fortunes. There was great excitement through all the village, and on the top of the hill the people stood standing, holding their sides with laughter, as they watched Stargazer trudging bravely along the valley with his bundle at the end of his stick. It was enough to make anyone laugh, certainly. It was well known for a full 20 miles round that there lived in the castle of Beloeil 12 princesses of wonderful beauty, and as proud as they were beautiful, and who were besides so very sensitive of such truly royal blood, they would have felt at once the presence of a pea in their beds, even if the mattresses had been laid over it. It was whispered about that they led exactly the lives that princesses ought to lead, sleeping far into the morning and never getting up until midday. Sounds wonderful. They had 12 beds, all in the same room, but what was very extraordinary was the fact that though they were locked in by triple bolts, every morning their satin shoes were found worn into holes. When they were asked what they had been doing all night, they always answered that they had been asleep, and indeed no noise was ever heard in the room, yet the shoes would not wear themselves out alone. At last the Duke of Beloeil ordered the trumpet to be sounded and a proclamation to be made that whoever could discover how his daughters wore out their shoes should choose one of them for his bride. On hearing the proclamation, a number of princes arrived at the castle to try their luck. They watched all night behind the open door of the princesses, but when the morning came, they had all disappeared, and no one could tell what had become of them. When he reached the castle, Michael went straight to the gardener and offered his services. Now it happened that the garden boy had just been sent away, and though the stargazer did not look very sturdy, the gardener agreed to take him on, as he thought that his pretty face and golden curls would please the princesses. The first thing he was told was that when the princesses got up, he was to present each one of them with a bouquet, and Michael thought that if he had nothing more unpleasant to do, then he should get on very well. Accordingly, he placed himself behind the door of the princess's room with the 12 bouquets in a basket. He gave one to each of the sisters, and they took them without even deigning to look at the lad, except Lena, the youngest, who fixed her large black eyes as soft as velvet on him and exclaimed, "Oh, how pretty he is, our new flower boy." The rest all burst out laughing, and the eldest pointed out that a princess ought never to lower herself by looking at a garden boy. Now Michael knew well what had happened to ail the princes, but notwithstanding, the beautiful eyes of the Princess Lena inspired him with a violent longing to try his fate. Unhappily, he did not dare to come forward, being afraid that he should only be jeered at, or even turned away from the castle on account of his impudence. Nevertheless, the stargazer had another dream. The lady in the golden dress appeared to him once more, holding in one hand 2 young laurel trees, a cherry laurel and a rose laurel, and in the other hand a little golden rake, a little golden bucket, and a silken towel. And thus she addressed him. "Plant these 2 laurels in 2 large pots, rake them over with the rake, water them with the bucket, and wipe them with the towel. And when they are grown as tall as a girl of 15, say to each of them, 'My beautiful laurel, with the golden rake I have raked you, and with the golden bucket I have watered you, and with the silken towel I have wiped you.' Then, after that, ask anything you choose, and the laurels will give it to you." Michael thanked the lady in the golden dress, and when he woke he found the 2 laurel bushes beside him, so he carefully obeyed the orders he had been given by the lady. The trees grew very fast, and when they were as tall as a girl of 15, he said to the cherry laurel, "My lovely cherry laurel, with the golden rake I have raked thee, with the golden bucket I have watered thee, with the silken towel I have wiped thee. Tell me how to become invisible." Then there instantly appeared on the laurel a pretty white flower, which Michael gathered and stuck into his buttonhole. That evening, when the princesses went upstairs to bed, he followed them barefoot, so that he might make no noise, and hid himself under one of the 12 beds, so as not to take up much room. The princesses began at once to open up their wardrobes and boxes. They took out of them the most magnificent dresses, which they put on before their mirrors, and when they had finished, turned themselves all around to admire their appearances. Michael could see nothing from his hiding place, but he could hear everything, and he listened to the princesses laughing and jumping with pleasure. At last the eldest said, "Be quick, my sisters, our partners will be impatient." At the end of an hour, when the stargazer heard no more noise, he peeped out and saw the 12 sisters in splendid garments, with their satin shoes on their feet, and in their hands the bouquets he had brought them. "Are you ready?" asked the eldest. "Yes," replied the other 11 in chorus, and they took their places one behind the other. Then the eldest princess clapped her hands 3 times, and a trap door opened. All the princesses disappeared down a secret staircase, and Michael hastily followed them. As he was following on the steps of the Princess Lena, he carelessly trod on her dress. "There is somebody behind me," cried the princess. "They are holding my dress." "You foolish thing," said her eldest sister. "You were always afraid of something. It was only a nail which caught you." They went down, 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 till at last they came to a passage with a door at one end, which was only fastened with a latch. The eldest princess opened it, and they found themselves immediately in a lovely little wood, where the leaves were spangled with drops of silver, which shone in the brilliant light of the moon. They next crossed another wood, where the leaves were sprinkled with gold, and after that another still, where the leaves glittered with diamonds. At last the stargazer perceived a large lake, and on the shores of the lake 12 little boats with awnings, which were seated 12 princes, who, grasping their oars, awaited the princesses. Each princess entered one of the boats, and Michael slipped into that which held the youngest. The boats glided along rapidly, but Lena's, from being heavier, was always behind the rest. "We never went so slowly before," said the princess. "What can be the reason?" "I don't know," said the prince. I assure you I am rowing as hard as I can." On the other side of the lake, the garden boy saw a beautiful castle splendidly illuminated, whence came the lively music of fiddles, kettledrums, and trumpets. In a moment they touched land, and the company jumped out of the boats, and the princes, after having securely fastened their barks, gave their arms to the princesses and conducted them to the castle. Michael followed and entered the ballroom in their train. Everywhere were mirrors, lights, flowers, and damask hangings. The stargazer was quite bewildered at the magnificence of the sight. He placed himself out of the way in a corner, admiring the grace and beauty of the princesses. Their loveliness was of every kind. Some were fair, some were dark, some had chestnut hair or curls darker still, some had golden locks. Never were so many beautiful princesses seen together at one time. But the one whom the cowherd thought the most beautiful and most fascinating was the little princess with the velvet eyes. With what eagerness she danced! Leaning on her partner's shoulder, she swept by like a whirlwind. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkled, and it was plain that she loved dancing better than anything else. The poor boy envied those handsome young men with whom she danced so gracefully, but he did not know how little reason he had to be jealous of them. The young men were really the princes who, to the number of 50 at least, had tried to steal the princess's secret. The princesses had made them drink something of a philter, which froze the heart and left nothing but the love of dancing. They danced on till the shoes of the princesses were worn into holes. When the rooster crowed the third time, the fiddles stopped, and a delicious supper was served by young boys, consisting of sugared orange cakes, crystallized rose leaves, powdered violets, cracknels, wafers, and other dishes, which are, as everyone knows, the favorite food of princesses. After supper, the dancers all went back to their boats, and this time the stargazer entered that of the eldest princess. They crossed again the wood with the diamond-spangled leaves, the wood with the golden-sprinkled leaves, and the wood whose leaves glittered with drops of silver, and as a proof of what he had seen, the boy broke a small branch from a tree in the last wood. Lena turned as she heard the noise made by the breaking of the branch. "What was that noise?" she said. "It was nothing," replied her elder sister. "It was only the screech of the barn owl that roosts in one of the turrets of the castle." While she was speaking, Michael managed to slip in front, and running up the stairs, he reached the princess's room first. He flung open the window, and sliding down the vine which climbed up the wall, found himself in the garden just as the sun was beginning to rise, and it was time for him to set to his work. That day, when he made up the bouquets, Michael hid the branch with the silver drops in the nosegay intended for the youngest princess. When Lena discovered it, she was much surprised. However, she said nothing to her sisters, but as she met the boy by accident while he was walking under the shade of the elm, she suddenly stopped as if to speak to him, then, altering her mind, went on her way. The same evening, the 12 sisters went again to the ball, and the stargazer again followed them and crossed the lake in Lena's boat. This time it was the prince who complained the boat seemed heavy. "It is the heat," replied the princess. "I too have been feeling very warm." During the ball, she looked everywhere for the gardener's boy, but she never saw him. As they came back, Michael gathered a branch from the wood with the golden-spangled leaves, and now it was the eldest princess who heard the noise that it made in breaking. "It is nothing," said Lena, "only the cry of the owl which roosts in the turrets of the castle." As soon as she got up, she found the branch in her bouquet. When the sisters went down, she stayed a little behind and said to the cowherd, "Where does this branch come from?" "Your Royal Highness knows well enough," answered Michael. "So you have followed us?" "Yes, Princess." "How did you manage it? We never saw you." "I hid myself," replied the stargazer quietly. The princess was silent a moment and then said, "You know our secret. Keep it. Here is the reward of your discretion." And she flung the boy a purse of gold. "I do not sell my silence," answered Michael, and he went away without picking up the purse. For 3 nights, Lena neither saw nor heard anything extraordinary. On the 4th, she heard a rustling among the diamond-spangled leaves of the wood. That day, there was a branch of the trees in her bouquet. She took the stargazer aside and said to him in a harsh voice, "You know what price my father has promised to pay for our secret?" "I know, Princess," answered Michael. "Don't you mean to tell him?" "That is not my intention." "Are you afraid?" "No, Princess." "What makes you so discreet, then?" she asked. But Michael was silent. Lena's sisters had seen her talking to the little garden boy and jeered at her for it. "What prevents your marrying him?" asked the eldest. "You could become a gardener, too. It is a charming profession. You could live in a cottage at the end of the park and help your husband to draw up water from the well, and when we get up, you could bring us our bouquets." The Princess Lena was very angry, and when the stargazer presented her bouquet, she received it in a disdainful manner. Michael behaved most respectfully, He never raised his eyes to her, but nearly all day she felt him at her side without ever seeing him. One day, she made up her mind to tell everything to her eldest sister. "What?" said she. "This rogue knows our secret and you never told me? I must lose no time in getting rid of him." "But how?" the youngest princess asked. "Why, by having him taken to the tower with the dungeons, of course." For this was the way that in old times beautiful princesses got rid of people who knew too much. But the astonishing part of it was that the youngest sister did not seem at all to relish this method of stopping the mouth of the gardener's boy, who, after all, had said nothing to their father. It was agreed that the question should be submitted to the other 10 sisters. All were on the side of the eldest. When the youngest sister declared that if they laid a finger on the little garden boy, she would go herself and tell their father the secret of the holes in their shoes. At last it was decided that Michael would be put to the test. They would take him to the ball. At the end of supper would give him the philtre which was to enchant him like the rest. They sent for the stargazer and asked him how he had contrived to learn their secret. But still, he remained silent. Then in commanding tones, the eldest sister gave him the order they had agreed upon. He only answered, "I will obey." He had really been present, invisible, at the Council of Princesses and had heard all, but he had made up his mind to drink of the philtre and sacrifice himself to the happiness of her that he loved. Not wishing, however, to cut a poor figure at the ball by the side of the other dancers, he went at once to the laurels and said, "My lovely rose laurel, with golden rake I have raked thee. With golden bucket I have watered thee. With a silken towel I have dried thee. Dress me like a prince." A beautiful pink flower appeared. Michael gathered it and found himself in a moment clothed in velvet, which was as black as the eyes of the little princess, with a cap to match, a diamond aigrette, and a blossom of the rose laurel in his buttonhole. Thus dressed, he presented himself that evening before the Duke of Beloeil, and obtained leave to try and discover his daughter's secret. He looked so distinguished that hardly anyone would have known who he was. The 12 princesses went upstairs to bed. Michael followed them and waited behind the open door till they gave the signal for departure. This time he did not cross in Lena's boat. He gave his arm to the eldest sister, danced with each in turn, and was so graceful that everyone was delighted with him. At last the time came for him to dance with the little princess. She found him the best partner in the world, but he did not dare to speak a single word to her. When he was taking her back to her place, she said to him in a mocking voice, "Here you are at the summit of your wishes. You are being treated like a prince." "Don't be afraid," replied the stargazer gently. "You shall never be a gardener's wife." The little princess stared at him with a frightened face, and he left her without waiting for an answer. When the satin slippers were worn through, the fiddles stopped, and the young servant boys set the table. Michael was placed next to the eldest sister and opposite to the youngest. They gave him the most exquisite dishes to eat and the most delicate wines to drink, and in order to turn his head more completely, compliments and flattery were heaped on him from every side, but he took care not to be intoxicated either by the wine or the compliments. At last the eldest sister made a sign, and one of the young pages brought in a large golden cup. "The enchanted castle has no more secrets for you," she said to the stargazer. "Let us drink to your triumph." He cast a lingering glance at the little princess, and without hesitation lifted the cup. "Don't drink!" suddenly cried out the little princess. "I would rather marry a gardener." And she burst into tears. Michael flung the contents of the cup behind him, sprang over the table, and fell at Lena's feet. The rest of the princesses fell likewise at the knees of the princess. The rest of the princes fell likewise at the knees of the princesses, each of whom chose a husband and raised him by her side. The charm was broken. The 12 couples embarked in the boats, which crossed back many times in order to carry over all the other princes. Then they all went through the 3 woods, and when they passed the door of the underground passage, a great noise was heard, as if the enchanted castle was crumbling to the earth. They went straight to the room of the Duke of Beloeil, who had just awoke. Michael held in his hand the golden cup, and he revealed the secret of the holes in the shoes. "Choose then," said the Duke, "whichever you prefer." "My choice is already made," replied the garden boy, and he offered his hand to the youngest princess, Lena, who blushed and lowered her eyes. Lena did not become a gardener's wife. On the contrary, it was the stargazer who became a prince. But before the marriage ceremony of the princess, insisted that her lover should tell her how he came to discover the secret. So he showed her the 2 laurels which had helped him, and she, like a prudent girl, thinking they gave him too much advantage over his wife, cut them at the root and threw them in the fire. And this is why the country girls go about singing, Nous n'irons plus au bois, les laurels sont coupés, and dancing in summer by the light of the moon.